Okay. Yes, thank you all for coming. My name is Guy Blood. I'm the current president of the Edmonton Interfaith Center, and I'm pleased to welcome you all to this lunch and learn session, which is we used to hold them in face-to-face meetings, and that worked very well. But we haven't been able to do that for a long time, and we used to have a regular time in which we held these events, and that hasn't worked out recently either. So it's been sporadic whenever people are available and whenever topics are in demand. So we're responding to the needs, and that seems to be working all right too. So I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 6 land, and that's land that's been occupied by the indigenous peoples of North America for a long, long time. And the settlers whom we represent, many people, there might be some indigenous people here, but we are all the beneficiaries of kind of a criminal act in the very beginning, starting with the Pope and then the kings of Europe, saying it was okay to occupy other lands and suppress the people and just take over. And we're the beneficiaries of that decision and that whole process. And it's been, I don't know where we're going to go from here, but it's an ongoing problem that needs to be solved. And many people are working on how to make everybody at least happy in the arrangement. And that being said, I'd like to ask Netta to say a few words about the Interfaith Center and what we're doing, and welcome our guest speaker today. Netta?
Well, thank you, Guy. Yes, we are a not-for-profit society incorporated 25 years ago. We are an educational body just for people to learn more about each other, because the more we know about each other, the fewer misunderstandings we'll have, misconceptions, and that gets us involved in peace work and certainly TRC work. And really, we try to do everything we possibly can. We do, and I think we're all tremendously proud of what we do as a very, very small society with on a shoestring budget. And Lunch and Learn has been one of our most successful programs for sure. We sell a multi-faith calendar that comes out of California. Where did that come from? Vancouver. It's a Canadian product with all beautiful Canadian artwork. If you're interested in that, let me know. And basically, we believe in religious literacy, that religion is a huge part of identity and cultural, ethnic, every identity, and it needs to be talked about respectfully, and if it's okay to ask questions and find out the differences that we have as well as our similarities. So in a nutshell, that's what we do. Thank you. And Kate's been on our radar to talk to for a long time. Kathy Reith, who is here, is one of our board members, and she suggested Kate before, and we finally got around to actually extending an invitation. So Kate, thank you very much.
Thank you, and hello everyone, and thank you, Kathy. Kathy and I crossed paths through Soroptimus International, through she used to volunteer for the Seats Men of Honor Awards, and wherever there's some community action, I think Kathy is very present. I have known about the work of the Interfaith Center for probably since it began. Prior to this present work I'm involved in, I worked with Development and Peace, which was, it's an international organization, solidarity organization in the Catholic community, and I worked on many ecumenical social justice initiatives during those years. I find it interesting that the Interfaith Center catalyzed into a nonprofit just at the same time as the little organization now known as CEASE catalyzed into a nonprofit and a charity in the mid 90s. But as we all know, it's a movement of concerned people in the community who then catalyze into nonprofits, because the realities and the needs have been existing for a long time. And it's that you know, that beautiful story of 2 or 3 people getting together to say, we want to do something and we want to make it different and we want to be part of community transformation. So thank you for your presence in the community of Edmonton. Transformation happens on all angles of the circle, where I think we're all needed. It kind of fell to me to become involved in this particular aspect of the, you know, the transformative work. It came to me. I never grew up thinking I would be involved in this work, but it happened. I don't want to spend too much time talking about that origin, except to say that I had taken a pause between the work with development and peace, which required me to be away for 50% of the time. And I had young children. And then at that time, that is when the very visible street sexual exploitation was present in our community of Macaulay. And literally it was a knock on the door, a number of women kind of running to our door because we leave the light on, asking for help. So the community got together. And because I was at that time in between paid employment, being present with my children, you know, I kind of got volunteered and the rest unfolded into full-time paid work. The little organization started as a response to the visible, as I said, and then we began to learn about the invisible. And that's been part of the journey, which I hope to talk a little bit about. What I put together today was just some very simple slides. I am not very good at fancy PowerPoints. They're really a way to help me keep on track. And then just to create that visual for yourselves, because it's hard to listen a lot all the time. What I thought I would do is start with some big picture realities and then talk a little bit about, I'll use the language of human trafficking for sexual exploitation, some of the dynamics there, and then what are some of the, you know, movements towards hope? What are some of the practical things? And hopefully I can talk fast enough that there will be time for you to ask questions or join in the conversation from your own experiences as well, and make this really rich. What Guy and Ned and I talked about is if a question pops into your mind, write it in the chat. We won't stop to respond, but at the end we'll have a series of questions that we can converse on together. Sound okay? Okay. You know, I would just like to acknowledge that the flame behind me is from the Native Women's Association's Sisters in Spirit annual campaign, which happens October 4th. And I liked the flame, so I just kept it. I was part of an event on that day. So, sorry, I have to go back and share the screen. Great, and now I have to start the slideshow, I think. No, I think it's good. I still stumble through some of this, but let's go from the beginning. So here we are. And I want us to be aware. I know that Netta contacted me because this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and you wanted to focus a little bit on gender-based violence. November 25th begins the UN 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence. And it concludes with December 6th, which is Canada's National Day of Remembrance against an action against violence against women. There's many resources. You just can Google and find out what's happening either in Edmonton or Alberta, Canada, or the United Nations. Lots of resources there. I think we all know too that we are situated within the, as we like to say, the MMIWG calls to justice. There's 231. And that can also be a a resource and a reflection if, if you as a committee have not, or center have not had time to really go in depth. I think it's important to listen to those calls. And the way that Guy began the meeting was that, denouncing and decolonizing and developing knowledge and seeing ways that we can be involved in protecting, supporting, and promoting, confronting and speaking out. How do we hold our governments accountable? And I think the work of the center, you do try to create that time and space to develop respectful relationships and embrace differences. There's specific calls for justice for Inuit, for Métis, and for 2S LGBTQIA. So it's a rich and powerful resource we have at this time in our history. We also know that we continue to live in this pandemic. And you probably have heard, in the news that the pandemic has had really a high impact on young women and mothers, and that is part of the area of struggle, partly because women are employed in like the 5 C's: clerical, catering, cashiering, and cleaning and caregiving. Many women had to step back from paid employment to either care for children or for ill family members. More women than men access the 2 federal benefits. And there's, again, a continuing unemployment rate for racialized group, especially racialized women. So there's lots of resources that can help us, gain the factual picture on this, but it's what we're living with. And gender-based violence is connected to gender pay gap. Again, we've got great resources through the Edmonton Social Planning Council that really breaks down this difference between what women earn and how many women are in the low wage category. Now, interestingly enough, how this fits into sexual exploitation and sex trafficking is that the gender-based pay gap and gender-based violence do contribute to sexual exploitation and sex trafficking. They create vulnerabilities and create vulnerable situations. So we all lived through the federal election. And during that time, again, citizens mobilized in different ways. There were marches, certainly in Toronto, for basic income, which was exciting. People were raising, the need for a national childcare system, housing affordability. I've just signed yet another petition to our MPs on the housing needs of Canadians. We lived through the recognition of the many unmarked graves, which then gave more emphasis to the TRC report from 5 years ago and the inquiry. And we've just come through, the COP and the climate change, which is on everybody's mind. As I was preparing for today, a news flash came across my screen that says, our Premier and the Prime Minister have agreed that Alberta will work towards a $10 a day daycare subsidy within the next 5 years. So this is very good news for many single moms and for families with children. So that's, again, the environment that we are all working in. The other flash that came across my screen was that the whole town of Merritt has been evacuated due to flooding. So climate change and catastrophic weather events, again, are part of our lived reality now. I always find it very humbling to remember what is the actual income of people earning a minimum wage, or people on AISH and Alberta supports, barriers to full-time employment, and those who are in the Alberta supports expected to work. Many of the women that cease supports are in these categories. So again, we can see the link between gender inequality and gender-based violence rooted in some of the financial realities. So now we'll just shift to the big picture around human trafficking for purposes of sexual exploitation. My expertise is not in the area of labor exploitation or human trafficking for organ removal or for forced gang activity. So I'll just speak from my experience. What we know, and it's all links in with domestic violence and sexual violence, that the abuse of power and control creates the opposite of a culture of respect. And again, I know that the Interfaith Center, that's your work, is to foster a culture of respect. This power and control wheel came to all of us through the domestic violence network. All the work on that in North America in particular, but really examining how this abuse is what contributes to so many other vulnerabilities. And there can be different forms of abuse as outlined in that circle. Again, I'm not going to dwell on that. The resource is publicly available, but you can get the picture of how many are abused in different ways. Human trafficking is a big business. It is exploiting and trafficking people for profit. And again, this abuse of power. And it's a triangle. There are the traffickers and exploiters and profiteers. There are those who are harmed and who suffer. And then there is the demand for the activity that then generates the profit and motivates traffickers and profiteers. So I'm going to speak a little bit more about that. Canada in the year 2000, the United Nations declared the Palermo Protocol to address human trafficking in all its forms. Canada signed on in 2002. When a country signs on to an international protocol, then that country must initiate several kinds of action. They must create their own laws if they did not have any before. They must engage in public awareness, and they must engage in providing supports and services for those who are harmed. And they must take action to discourage the demand that fosters all form of exploitation of persons, especially women and children. This is the one area that is often forgotten, this taking action to discourage the demand. So who is being sexually exploited? Well, all genders. The high majority are female, over 90%. Also, the important thing for us to recognize as kind of older people and elders in the community is that this is mainly young people who are being exploited. According to Statistics Canada, the exploitation is for those both under 18, but primarily between 18 and 25. And sadly, the people leading the exploitation are also young, under the age of 35. So in Canada, the Native Women's Association of Ontario named that 51% of those being exploited for sexual purposes are Indigenous women. We do know that Asian women are being brought in from China, Japan, Korea, and Taiwan, other countries, to work in massage parlors and as traveling escorts. This is really what I would call the invisible face, because many of us working in the field do not speak Mandarin, Cantonese, Japanese. And we know that there's a lot of poverty in China and these countries, which then increases the vulnerability. And we know that many of the women who either come or are brought are trying to help their own families deal with poverty situations in their own countries. As more people, immigrate to Canada from African and Caribbean countries, we are starting to see some women from those countries among the trafficked. We also know that Alberta certainly had the reputation for booming with our oil and resource sector industry. and that many young women from rural Quebec in particular, or the big cities, were vulnerable to being recruited to come west because the money's good. We know that there's a number of trafficking rings based out of Montreal, and it's created this condition of vulnerability. So who is exploiting? Again, the traffickers, a high majority are young men. So then we begin to see, again, this gender inequality. The high majority of those who are being trafficked for sexual exploitation are females. The high majority of those who are trafficking are males. And again, young people. The traffickers can be boyfriends, it can also be family members, or they can be peers and friends who, who think that they're helping each other get the money they need. The other reality is they can be organized criminal groups. And this is where we really need to have a specialized focus that really only law enforcement can do, is to look at that higher level of control through organized crime. We know there are profiteers. There's so many websites, porn sites, and there are people who profit by creating these websites and porn sites. Then there are people who are drivers, advertisers, photographers. They are part of the invisible network who are profiteering. And then there's the consumers, the demand, those who use the websites and those who seek to purchase sex services. On Saturday, I just spent the day with 14 men and a team of resource people at what we call the Sex Trade Offender Program. These were men who were arrested either through street undercover operations or what we call hotel undercover operations. And our province, 25 years ago, created an adult alternative measures program, which offers men who are arrested for the first time, who have no recognized history of violence against women and children. It offers them the chance to learn. The goals of our program are to provide accurate information about the law, sexually transmitted infections, the dynamics of exploitation and trafficking, and to build empathy, because we know that when we have empathy and understanding, then we are less likely to choose to intentionally harm another person. So that's what the 8 hours is about. And it's often the first chance that men have to talk openly in a safe environment about why they were out that particular night or why they were cruising the internet. And as the day unfolds, they become more and more honest about what's happening in their lives. And I really think this is an important piece of the puzzle. We need to find ways to engage young men, middle-aged men, men who are alone, men who are, challenged in their relationships. We need to find safe spaces to encourage men to talk so that they don't participate in exploitative, hurtful behaviors, and they find ways to heal themselves individually and through community. But they've named a number of different reasons. I've put those up there. Again, we won't dwell on those at this point, but we cannot address gender-based violence and gender inequality without engaging men and boys in the whole conversation all along the way. And I do want to make a statement that I'm using, I guess, binary terms, but I am, trying to include all those who are non-binary and of different orientations when I speak. I think this is really important. And again, I think for those of you who are coming from an interfaith perspective, is to really, this is where you can have support and expertise, and to really understand the spiritual and psychological impact of exploitation, both on those who are harmed and on those who participate. You know, I had a young man stand up yesterday. At the end of the day, I asked the men to stand up and tell us what did you learn? What's an action you may take? And this young man stood up and he broke down crying, and he kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm crying. And we said, no, it's okay to cry. I mean, he spoke about moving from his hometown, about being lonely during COVID, about not having anyone to talk to. And he just thought he would try this, go online and look for an escorting woman. And he didn't think about how it was hurting him or her. So we know that that by listening to those who've been harmed and those who cause harm, all of this can happen. This shattering of souls and distorting of love and respectful relationships. It can lead people into a PTSD and complex PTSD and all of these challenges over here. Suicide, a couple of the men said that they felt suicidal when, and we know that certainly a number of the women have felt suicidal, and both parties, some have taken their lives. We know that of suicide in Alberta, 3 out of every 4 persons who takes their lives are men. So I talk about this because it's important to realize these deep, profound impacts of this, triangle of exploitation. So let's shift a little bit from harsh realities to hope building. I'm keeping an eye on the time as well. And I would like to just talk a little bit about CEASE, because everything that this little organization has created has come from listening to the pain that was being lived out, and listening to the individuals, the families, and the communities. So we've created what we call a circle of supports. And what's most important is, with a circle, you can enter any point and be connected. Another aspect is that CEASE is just a little circle. And we like to say, if we can't help you, we know who can, and thus connect out to other initiatives and programs in our community. That's what's really important. So we have the 3 strategies of healing the harm, helping people build for the future, and inspiring positive change. I'm, again, sensitive to time, so I'm not going to spend a lot of detail on this, but we can come back to it, or you can contact me afterwards. But we have to start everywhere, from the point of harm and danger to living your life forward after that critical phase. We've been talking a lot about basic income and not in our society. The pandemic catalyzed us into recognizing the cracks that have always been there. The federal government created a response through the CERB and CRB. And there's lots of talk now, would a basic income be a new path forward for our society that could reduce poverty, encourage employment, reduce stigma, and potentially, reduce the barriers that, that we've created, for example, through Alberta Works and AISH. I am always pained when I hear the high obstacles and barriers that people who are impoverished or people who are with health challenges, have to jump just to get enough, barely enough to pay the rent or buy some food. So is there a better way of doing things? The basic income is being talked about. It'll be up to us as a society to create that. We did a study with some funding through the Edmonton Community Foundation and some of the federal COVID relief, in which we were actually able to work with a very small group of women, 5, and we were able to add some dollars into their household economy. And we asked them, what difference could a basic income make? Well, one woman said, I wouldn't have to turn to the sex trade if there was a basic income. It could mean no judgment, life easier for single women. It would no longer be an option to turn to the sex trade. I would worry less. I wouldn't be always fearful of the bills that come in or help to pay with childcare. It would make some things easier. And this is just so true. What we find is a motivator is that, you know, women, as women, our basic life instinct, if we have children, we must provide for them. And if there is no option, then we maybe feel driven to lay our bodies on the line to, you know, that is what is age old about this whole area. And so if women didn't have to worry about those basic needs being met, there would be less women in the sex trade. There would be less vulnerability to being pulled in through traffickers and to being exploited. And we would break that cycle of harm. These are some of the recommendations that we put forward in our little study called Bridging the Affordability Gap. Again, I've touched on it a little bit by talking about basic income. We have so many women who are on what we call barriers to full-time employment. And because of the violence that they've experienced throughout their lives, say of either physical or mental health challenges, it would be beneficial if they could be transferred to AISH. We also call for a name change, and from assured income for the severely handicapped to assured income supporting health, which again takes away stigma. And what it recognizes that if you are in a vulnerable situation in your life for whatever reason, you are welcome and supported by other Albertans to achieve as much health as you can and to live with dignity. One person we know had pulled herself out of terrible childhood abuse and exploitation into going back to school, having a full-time job, being able to fully support herself, and then was stricken with cancer. So she's now on AISH, but the hoops she has had to go through as a single woman to be able to support herself are really demeaning, and we could do this differently. So we recommended a number of steps. I wanted you to know about some big picture resources. We're anxiously awaiting the results of the Alberta Human Trafficking Task Force. The recommendations are before the Premier and the Provincial Cabinet right now. This task force took time to truly listen. They listened to so many people who had survived, the horrors of human trafficking. We really hope that we will be seeing some differences in Alberta. We know the federal government has put money into a national action plan. Again, that's one of the commitments of signing on to the Palermo Protocol. I'm sure you maybe have received in your mail the great annual publication called Vital Signs. I've got it right here beside me. This one is called Making Ends Meet in Edmonton. We know we have End Poverty Edmonton working with so many others in the community to begin to try to address this. And there's also great resources to look at the impact of the She Session, how the pandemic has affected women more. I find I always need symbols of hope to keep on going through the tough times and walking with people who are enduring so much. We have a facilitative organization called Not in My City in Alberta. And it was a great day. This is now, oh my goodness, certainly back in 2019, I think, or even 2018, where we were at our international airport with all the key leaders. And we were announcing that this campaign, that this shouldn't be happening. I sat with several women who had been exploited as children and young people. And to have this big mirror in front of them meant that finally their voices had been heard. So there's many ways to get involved in the work, and this Not in My City has done it's about a 30-minute online basic awareness of human trafficking. They've got the airports to sign on. I can tell you personally that our organization has been called upon to support several women who the airport staff have identified as being trafficked because of this bigger movement and signing on. So that's encouraging. This is a website that I encourage you to look at. This is the website of Kathy King, who is dedicated to her life to making, helping some positive light come out of the horror of her daughter's death. She has gone through all the MMIWG calls to action and kind of broken them down. So if you don't have time to read the whole big report, you can go to her website and learn more. I think it's also great and it's so vital that we have a number of initiatives coming from men. I just highlighted here the Moose Hide campaign led by Indigenous men, but we know there are many others. The White Rose campaign started after the terrible murders on December 6th in Montreal. And I was recently part of a lunch and learn where there are a number of young men with different organizations in Edmonton spoke about the need and what the work they're facilitating so that young men can break the cycles of toxicity and learn what it means to be a healthy man, healthy masculinities. And I felt really encouraged that we have some great young male leaders in Edmonton. And there we go. There's our contact information. Oh, and I thought, let's just end with a bit of hope that we can do this wherever you are. There's things that you can do, the work that you're all part of, whether it's through your organization or your individual organizations or your participation, or whether your grandparents creating safety for your children and grandchildren. All of this can work to good and does work to good. So I think we can stop there and we can engage in some conversation. Thank you very much.
So are there any questions? I don't see any in the chat. I'm wondering if somebody has some questions or comments even.
Well, yeah,
Comments? Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'd like to jump in, and I can speak faster than I can chat. So Kathleen, what you were talking about on the weekend, that is what is referred to as John School, is it?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I've never known much about it. I'm delighted to hear that it can be effective, because I think that, there's kind of a, going back to movies like, oh gosh, it was the Italian one, and oh gosh, I've just completely forgot, with Simone Signoret. There's kind of a, maybe, especially in young, somewhat naive men, the idea that there's something glamorous about being a prostitute. And maybe some young women think it too, especially if they have a pimp that buys them nice clothes and keeps them stoned all the time. And so if men in particular can really be made to see that there's a human being who's only doing this because she has, out of absolute sheer desperation, then maybe that's the biggest hope there. Yeah.
Yes, I would agree. And I say that we all, especially young people, swim in a sea of sexualized consumerism. They're just bombarded all the time. And there are changing sexual mores, some of it being in healthy relationships, healthy sexuality. That's what we want to encourage. But it is so easy to become distorted, especially when you put the profit motive in, which is there. And we had, as I said, I think we had 14, 15 men there. That's a drop in the bucket. We've always wanted to have the capacity to do more, and engage men before they're arrested, engage boys, at that earlier age. So I see that whole work of prevention is really key. what we do see, from the beginning of the day to the end of the day is this beginning of a transformation. Now, you can't layer everything onto an 8-hour day. We've had a psychologist look at our curriculum, and she said, you're doing the best you can in 8 hours. And we provide the men with the tools, with resources, different kinds of group. What I'm so encouraged about now is that we have 2 men who, who co-facilitate with me, especially in the afternoon. And these are men who used to engage in this behavior, who no longer do. And they share their journey. They share what has worked for them. And when I invite men at the end to stand up, one man got up and he said, I have bought sex more than 100 times, and it stops here. I'm going to channel all the money that I was spending back into my family and into, my children and positive things. And I think that it was the combination of hearing both from one woman who was exploited via street exploitation, one who was exploited through escorting and massage parlors, and then the mother whose daughter was murdered, plus the courage of those 2 men to come and be part of the program and to tell their stories and their journeys. I think it really builds hope. The question is, how can we have a bigger impact, beyond the men in that room? But the other thing I would like to say, there's a very low rearrest rate. It's 1 to 3%. At the same time, we know that human behavior takes a while to change, and that we all make New Year's resolutions that we may break. And so there's a difference between the rearrest rate and what you might call recidivism. And with recidivism, what we do know is that even if one has a relapse into the unhealthy behavior, if you take that as a learning opportunity, then you can turn it into like a recycle, and you can then begin to say, okay, what did I learn? I did this again. What help do I need? Who do I need to talk to? And where do I go for resources? So I tend to see this in the bigger perspective of the journey of change, individual change. But we need bigger systemic change.
Thank you.
That's wonderful to see that a part of the presentation, at least, focusing on the drivers for the men seeking sexual exploitation.
Mm-hmm.
It's criminal act, no question about that. I'm not arguing that, but all the factors that go into the decision making and the needs and the driving behaviors, it's good to see that rather than just identify them, catch them, and put them in jail, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's on the other side, the need for money, the need for resources to support your life is so important. And that I'm very glad that you mentioned the universal basic income, because that could be a wonderful resource to help impact this situation totally.
It could be, and I would like to share what I feel is, again, good news. We've been blessed to have a philanthropist the last 5 years who has provided CEASE additional funds, which we use directly to infuse people's economic realities. So whether that's food cards or bus tickets, or we've also, helped with some bills. Most important too is we add in coaching. So, how to move from this situation of desperation into a bit more stability. Though what I often feel sometimes that the work we're doing is people are swimming in the poverty sea, and they might be in a very leaky boat. We're helping to patch some of the leaks. Maybe if they've lost their oars, we're providing tools that are like oars. Still, we need to change the condition of the poverty sea, or we'll always be in that charity response, which is important. That helps people stay alive for today. But I know many of you, are familiar with that long ago image of the 2 feet of social justice, both the charity and the justice response. So, you know, we try to start with charity, but always with this eye of moving towards justice so that people don't have to come to us always with their hand out. Like, that is so hard to admit. I don't have enough money to pay the bills. I don't want to turn to the sex trade, or I did turn to the sex trade once again, and I'm feeling shamed and burdened, and I don't want to be in this situation. How can you help? So some of the funds from the sex trade offender program are used again for bursaries and for basic poverty relief and for trauma recovery. With that little bit of money from the men, you could say it's kind of a restorative justice. CEASE as a little organization has been able to say to others, join us. So we now do have an endowment at MacEwan University, an endowment at Norquest College, the Edmonton Community Foundation, Eldon and Ann Foot Fund provides annual funds so that we can grant bursaries to other academic institutions. And a wonderful woman who was an Alberta author, she donated the proceeds of her books to help us create the Awenita Fund, especially for Indigenous women. We're able, you know, one woman is now just completing her law degree through that Awenita Fund. So I think that when this little organization started all those years ago, we did it collectively. We asked what activity causes the most harm to the most people. And that circle of community included residents, neighborhood residents like myself. It included parents whose daughters were being exploited. It included women who had been exploited, frontline workers from helping organizations, police and Crown prosecutors. And we named that it was the activity of the men who were exploiting the highly vulnerable people in our community and harassing women and children on their way to school. And we said, that's what we're going to focus on. And out of that, you know, we created this whole program, supports 25 years later. So it was getting clear on what's causing the harm, and then what can we do to heal that harm. Let's not stay with healing the harm. Let's build for the future and motivate, inspire social justice change.
Are there any other questions or comments? You're inspired to say something. I can ask a question. Is there a role for education in the public school system to aid the solution to this problem?
Well, I believe that, you know, that we must, and also look to the, you know, alternative education schools. It can be very challenging. We do know that already there's barriers to engaging education. There were some engaging children and youth in education there because of some legislation whereby parents, you know, needed to sign on if their children were, you know, to be educated about sexual exploitation or human trafficking and other matters of sexuality. So there's systemic challenges. I think that maybe going forward, as we become more comfortable to talk about human trafficking, that we might then begin to see some changes that, you know, that we're able to respond to, you know, in the schools. Right now, groups like CEASE and many others, we can only be invited. So there isn't a systemic curriculum response. I was part of a committee in the early years when we all worked together, and then our province responded by creating what's called the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children Act, which created safe houses and outreach support. And we all stressed the need for education. And we worked for a year with an incredible team of people with expertise. And we created curriculum materials K to 12. What we did not know at the time was that it could be blocked by an intergovernment committee, and it was. And there are times when I almost weep, because I think if we had been able to move that into our schools in the late 90s, which is when we did that work, how many young lives might be different today. So it's part of those systemic barriers. Yeah.
Any other questions? I have another comment about what we're doing at the Edmonton Interfaith Center. Is we're very aware that some of the writings in the biblical and other religious texts support the idea of supremacy of men in relationship to women, and we are trying to counter that. We have been trying to counter that in every faith group in our organization, with some success. I think it's just the awareness that it's there, and the willingness of leaders within each community to rationalize those texts a little bit better for the modern age. So it's just to be aware that we're working on it.
Great.
Now I think we're getting close to the end. If there's no other questions, I think Netta has some closing comments if she's still there. I see her video's turned off, so maybe she's grabbing a coffee or something.
I think Nettie had her hand up. Nettie
Okay.
Cost.
I didn't see that.
I just wanted to say that I noticed in our church bulletin a couple of months ago that they were actually advertising for young men or men to sign up for a program to help them if there's any pornography problems. So it was nice pornography, sexual things. So it was nice. I can't remember who was, I'd have to look it up, who was sponsoring it, you know, to have these men go to a workshop or a Zoom workshop. So that's also a step that it's out there, and some people, you know, grasp it, and some things, as I had worked with youth all of my life, and I see that it becomes a challenge with all the advertising and music for all of these younger women who are attracted and who could get caught up in drugs and be a sponge to, unfortunately, a stepping stone into some of these things. And even though, and sometimes the parents are just naive about it, a lot of these things, and those were often in there, the pariahs are there, whether in the malls and get, you know, really hook them up with drugs or take them, you know, all these promises. So yeah, the help that they can get is important, and the education that the different groups, cease and all these different groups through you know, through the churches or through the multi-faith or government people, or people who just realize, and I think there is help through, like in the counseling or whatever. Maybe it's not in all the programs, but it's just too bad that in the 90s that was sort of squashed or whatever. It's because it's important, and like you said, it could have been helped, and I mean, it's going to be a never-ending challenge, but education and support and ways to have young men and women deal with these issues face on and get the support they need.
Yeah. Thank you, Nettie, and I want to really thank you for bringing to our attention again that group talking about pornography. I think that is one area where faith communities, you know, there is a safe space created when people gather, and the you know, 10 years ago there were men in the Mormon community and gathering to talk about pornography, and then one of their actions was they brought backpacks to the cease office. There are men in different church communities. I had one man come up to me, one young man. I was over at Strathcona Baptist, And he was saying to me, where can I go to talk about this? I'm really struggling. So I think that is a role that faith communities can play. When I was searching for a very short video to show at the Sex Trade Offender Program, I found videos by imams, by Hindu leaders, by evangelical Christian leaders, by mainstream Christian leaders, by men of no faith who were, TED Talks talking about the impact of pornography on them as persons. So what we know is this is pretty universal. And again, what we know is that there's a big business. We can never forget the business profiteering part of this whole world, and that we can help wherever we can. So faith communities can open up and have those safe conversations with young men. Thank you.
Kionetta.
As Guy said in the introduction, I don't think we don't have to end right at 1 o'clock, but we understand that some people may have to leave. I actually do have to leave myself because I have another thing at 1 o'clock. But I wanted to say again, thank you all, to show you our beautiful calendar for 2022, and to remind you that we are a membership organization. We have 5 or 6 people on this Zoom today who are not members. That you don't have to be a member to take part in anything that we do, but it would be lovely. It's $25 a year. And it's wonderful. Our members encourage us. The fact that people will actually make that commitment to us is very encouraging. So you all know our email address, or you probably wouldn't be here at all. So thank you again. And Kate, that was just awesome. Thank you so much. I wonder, what about decriminalization? Or, I mean, that's some countries have tried it. I know that it's soliciting is what's illegal. I think here, this is probably a little late in the day to be asking this question, but are the laws adequate? If the laws were applied fairly, which of course they're not, are they adequate?
So Netta, it's 12:59. I can tell you, I have a whole presentation on this particular topic. I was invited by the Alberta Human Trafficking Task Force to present, to give a global view of the laws. So I actually have a PowerPoint already. I have handouts, but it would be another hour-long conversation. And then I bring it right into Canada and to Alberta. So I could be on tap for another presentation.
Oh, yes. Speaking for all of us, I'm sure if we could book you in the new year, that would be fantastic, because it is a global problem, as you said, organized crime, all of that. Absolutely. Yes, please. And thank you.
Great, thanks.
And you can invite us to the session that you prepared the slides for.
Great, thanks.
Anybody else? Well, thank you very much, Kathleen. It's a wonderful presentation. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did too.
Thank you for the opportunity. It's always good to reflect and to be able to share. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Recording's going to stop, and stick around if anybody wants to chat with any of the other people here.